The gunshot that echoed through El Dorado Canyon that Tuesday morning in 1882 sent Harrison Quinn diving behind a water trough before he even registered where it had come from, his hand already on the Colt at his hip as dust kicked up from the street where the bullet had struck mere inches from his boot. He had been minding his own business, leading his sorrel mare toward the livery after 3 days of tracking strays across the Nevada desert, when all hell broke loose in the form of 6 riders tearing through town like the devil himself was on their heels. Harrison recognized the type immediately, outlaws fleeing from something or towards something, and neither option boded well for anyone caught in their path. What he did not expect was to see the wagon they were pulling, or the flash of calico fabric and terrified faces pressed against the wooden slats as they thundered past. Most men would have let it go. Smart men, anyway. But Harrison had never been accused of an overabundance of self-preservation, and something about those faces haunted him even as the dust settled, and the town began to cautiously emerge from cover. He caught the eye of Sheriff Dawson, a grizzled man with more gut than gumption, who was already shaking his head before Harrison even opened his mouth. "Do not even think about it, Quinn," Dawson said, spitting tobacco juice into the street. "That is the Garrett gang. 6 of the meanest sons of guns this side of the Rockies. Whatever they have got in that wagon is none of your concern." "Looked like women to me," Harrison said quietly, his jaw set in that particular way that meant his mind was already made up. 3 of them, maybe more. Probably took them from one of the ranches up north. Been hearing reports of raids." Dawson shrugged, though his expression was grim. "Terrible business, but you go after the Garrett gang alone and you will just be another body for me to bury. Wait until we can gather a proper posse." But Harrison was already calculating. A posse would take time, and time meant those women would be God knows where, suffering God knows what. He had seen what men like the Garrett gang did to captives, and the memory of finding his own sister's homestead burned to the ground 5 years ago, her and her husband murdered, still woke him in cold sweats. He had been too late then. Maybe he did not have to be too late now. He spent the rest of the day gathering supplies and information. The Garrett gang had a hideout in the Rocky Hills about 15 miles northeast of town, an old mining camp that had been abandoned when the silver vein ran dry. It was defensible, which made it dangerous, but Harrison had spent enough time in the cavalry before mustering out to know that defended positions were only as good as the men holding them. And men who thought they were safe got careless. The sun was setting when he rode out, painting the Nevada landscape in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if his mind had been on anything other than the task ahead. His horse, a sturdy mare named Copper, was steady beneath him, picking her way through the scrub brush and rocky terrain without complaint. He had bought her 3 years ago from a Paiute trader and had never regretted the decision. She had heart, and tonight he suspected he would need every bit of her courage and his own. The mining camp came into view as the last light faded from the sky. Harrison dismounted a 1/4 mile out, ground tying Copper in a small depression where she would be hidden from casual view, and proceeded on foot. 6 men, he reminded himself. 6 against 1 were poor odds by any measure, but surprise and determination could make up for a lot. He had his rifle, his pistol, and a knife in his boot. More importantly, he had patience. He spent 2 hours watching the camp from the cover of rocks and scraggly pinyon pines, learning the rhythm of the place. The outlaws had posted a single guard, a scraggly man who spent more time drinking from a flask than actually watching the perimeter. The others were gathered around a fire, their raucous laughter carrying across the still night air in a way that made Harrison's blood boil. The wagon sat off to one side, and he could just make out movement inside it. The women were still there, still alive. That was something. When the guard finally slouched down against a rock, his head nodding forward in what Harrison hoped was a drunken stupor, he made his move. Silent as a shadow, he crossed the open ground to the wagon, his heart hammering so hard he was certain someone would hear it. But the outlaws were too busy with their whiskey and their boasting, and he reached the wagon without incident. 3 faces looked up at him in the darkness, wide-eyed and terrified. They were young women, all of them, their dresses torn and dirty, their faces bruised. The eldest, who looked to be perhaps 22 or 23, had dark hair that had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves around her shoulders. Her eyes, even in the dim light, were a startling shade of blue, and they met his with a mixture of fear and desperate hope that nearly broke his heart. "I am here to help," he whispered, his hand already working at the ropes that bound their wrists. "But you have to trust me and do exactly as I say. Can you do that?" The eldest nodded slowly, then turned to her sisters. "Listen to him," she breathed, so quietly he almost missed it. The other 2, one perhaps 19 and the other barely 18, both nodded, tears streaming down their faces. He got them free of the bonds, though the rope had bitten deep into their wrists, leaving angry red marks that made his jaw clench. "Follow me, single file, and step where I step. No sounds." Leading 3 women who were weak from captivity and terror across rough terrain in the dark was harder than Harrison had anticipated. Every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot to his heightened senses, every stumble a potential disaster. But they moved as quietly as mice, even the youngest, who looked ready to collapse at any moment. The eldest brought up the rear, and Harrison could feel her eyes on his back, steady and focused despite everything she had been through. They had almost made it to where Copper waited when a shout went up from the camp. Someone had discovered the empty wagon. Harrison cursed under his breath and grabbed the eldest by the hand. "Run," he said, not bothering to whisper any more. "Run and do not look back." The next few minutes were a blur of motion and chaos. Harrison got all 3 women onto and around Copper, the youngest sitting in the saddle while her sisters clung to the stirrups and saddle horn, and he led them at a dead run through the darkness. Shots rang out behind them, bullets whining through the air, but Harrison knew this terrain better than he had any right to, having hunted these hills for years. He led them down into a dry wash, then up again, weaving through rocks and brush in a pattern designed to confuse anyone following. When he finally stopped, his lungs burning and his legs aching, they were a good 3 miles from the mining camp. He helped the women down, steadying each of them as they slid from the horse on trembling legs. The youngest immediately collapsed, and her middle sister knelt beside her, smoothing her hair back from her face and murmuring reassurances. The eldest stood, swaying slightly but upright, and met Harrison's gaze. "Thank you," she said, her voice rough. "I do not know who you are, but thank you." "Harrison Quinn," he said, tipping his hat automatically despite the circumstances. "And you are welcome, though we are not safe yet. They will come after us come morning." "I am Julian Jennings," she said, then gestured to her sisters. "This is Margaret and that is Catherine. We were taken 3 days ago from our homestead near Carson City. Our parents," her voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, visibly fighting for control. Harrison did not need her to finish. The fact that these 3 young women were alone told him everything he needed to know about the fate of their parents. "I am sorry," he said quietly, "but right now, we need to keep moving. Can your sister ride?" Catherine, the youngest, lifted her head. "I can ride," she said, though her voice shook. "I will not slow us down." She was lying, or at least exaggerating her strength, but Harrison respected the courage it took to make the claim. They set off again, this time at a more sustainable pace, with Catherine in the saddle and the rest of them walking. Margaret, the middle sister, stayed close to Catherine, one hand on her leg as if to reassure herself that her youngest sister was still there. Julian walked beside Harrison, her stride longer than he had expected, keeping pace despite the rough ground and her worn boots. "Where are we going?" she asked after they had been walking for an hour. "There is a trading post about 6 miles south of here, run by a man named Samuel Fletcher. He is a good man, and his wife Maria will be able to tend to you all properly. After that," he paused, glancing at her. "After that, I suppose that depends on what you want to do." "What we want does not matter much anymore," Julian said bitterly. "Everything we had is gone. Our home, our parents, our livestock, we have nothing. We are nothing." "You are alive," Harrison said firmly. "And as long as you are drawing breath, you are something. Do not let those men take that from you too." She looked at him for a long moment, her blue eyes searching his face as if trying to determine whether he truly believed what he said, or if he was just offering empty comfort. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly and returned her attention to the path ahead. Dawn was breaking when they finally stumbled into the trading post, a sturdy adobe structure with a corral and several outbuildings. Samuel Fletcher, a bear of a man with a salt and pepper beard, took one look at the exhausted group and ushered them inside without question. His wife Maria, a tiny woman with a spine of steel and a heart bigger than the Nevada sky, immediately took charge of the three sisters, clucking over them in a mixture of Spanish and English as she led them to the back room. "You look like you have been through the ringer yourself," Samuel said, pouring Harrison a cup of coffee so strong it could probably strip paint. "The Garrett gang. How did you know? Word travels. They have been raising hell all through this territory for months. You got those girls away from them. Stole them right out from under their noses," Harrison admitted, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. "They will be coming for them or for revenge. Maybe both." Samuel nodded slowly, stroking his beard. "Then we had better be ready. Maria and I did not survive 20 years in this country by rolling over for outlaws. We will stand with you." It was the kind of loyalty that could not be bought, only earned through years of being a decent neighbor and a good man. Harrison felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. They had a chance then. Not a great one, but a chance. The women emerged an hour later, cleaned up and wearing fresh dresses that Maria had scrounged from somewhere. The transformation was remarkable. Catherine, the youngest, had a sweet heart-shaped face and honey-colored hair that curled softly around her shoulders. Margaret, the middle sister, was taller and leaner, with the same dark hair as Julian but green eyes instead of blue. And Julian was beautiful. Not in the fragile, porcelain doll way that some women were, but in a strong, enduring way that suggested she could weather any storm and come out standing. Her dark hair was still damp from washing, pulled back in a simple braid that hung over one shoulder, and her blue eyes were clear and direct as they met his. She was wearing a dark blue calico dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and Harrison found himself staring like a fool until Samuel elbowed him sharply in the ribs. "Maria says they need food and rest," Samuel said loudly, breaking the moment, "and I am inclined to agree. Why do not you ladies sit down and let us feed you properly?" Breakfast was a quiet affair, the exhaustion of the night catching up with all of them. Catherine fell asleep at the table, her head pillowed on her arms, and Margaret was not far behind. Only Julian seemed to have the energy to remain upright, though Harrison could see the dark circles under her eyes and the way her hands shook slightly as she held her coffee. You should rest, he told her quietly. So should you, she countered. When was the last time you slept? 2 days ago, maybe. I lose track. Then we are both fools. She smiled slightly, the expression transforming her face. Though I suppose I should be grateful for your particular brand of foolishness. They talked as the morning wore on, Maria and Samuel taking the two younger sisters off to proper beds while Harrison and Julian remained at the table. She told him about their homestead, about how her father had moved them from Pennsylvania 5 years ago chasing the dream of land and opportunity, about how her mother had made the place beautiful despite the harsh climate, planting flowers and vegetables, sewing curtains for the windows, about how happy they had been, even though the work was hard and the living harder. The Garrett gang came at sunset, she said, her voice distant. We heard the horses but thought it was neighbors. By the time we realized they were already in the yard, my father tried to fight them off. She swallowed hard. He was a good man, but he was no gunfighter. They shot him down like a dog, and my mother, she stopped, pressing her fist against her mouth. Harrison reached across the table and took her other hand in his, squeezing gently. You do not have to tell me. My mother threw herself at them, screaming, and they shot her too. Just like that, so casual as if it meant nothing. Then they grabbed us, threw us in that wagon, and we have been traveling ever since. They talked about selling us to a brothel in San Francisco, or maybe keeping us for themselves. I think they were still deciding. She looked down at their joined hands, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. I thought we were going to die. I thought we would never see another sunrise. And then you appeared like something out of a storybook, and I still cannot quite believe you are real. I am real, he assured her, and you are safe now, I promise you that. How can you promise that? They are still out there, they will come for us. Then I will stop them. She looked up at him, those blue eyes searching. Why, you do not know us, we are nothing to you. Because it is the right thing to do, Harrison said simply. And because when I was younger, I failed to protect someone I loved, I will not fail again. Something shifted between them in that moment, some unspoken understanding that went deeper than words. Julian's fingers tightened around his, and Harrison felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. This woman, this brave, strong woman who had survived horrors and still had the courage to keep fighting, was looking at him like he was something special, like he was a hero. He wanted desperately to live up to that look. The Garrett gang arrived 2 days later, just as the sun was reaching its zenith. Harrison had been expecting them, had spent the intervening time preparing, setting up defensive positions and making plans with Samuel. Maria had taken the 3 sisters down into the root cellar, with strict instructions not to emerge no matter what they heard. And Harrison had been relieved when Julian had not argued, trusting him to handle what was coming. There were only 4 of them now. Harrison had taken 2 down during the escape, better shooting than he had any right to claim in the chaos and darkness. The leader, Jake Garrett, was easy to spot, a tall man with a cruel face and a scar running from his temple to his jaw. He rode at the front, confident and arrogant, clearly not expecting any real resistance. Quinn, he shouted when they were still 50 yards out. We know you are in there. Send out the women and we will let you live. Otherwise, we burn this place to the ground with all of you in it. Harrison stepped out onto the porch, his rifle held casually but ready. The women are under my protection. You want them, you go through me. Garrett laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. 1 man, you must be joking. 2 men, Samuel said, appearing in the doorway with his own rifle. And I served in the Army of the Potomac. I have killed better men than you over less. Your funeral, Garrett said with a shrug and went for his gun. What followed was fast and brutal. Harrison shot Garrett through the shoulder before the man had fully cleared leather, spinning him half around. Samuel took down the man to Garrett's left with a shot that spoke of long practice and steady nerves. The other two outlaws returned fire, bullets slamming into the adobe walls and splintering the wooden porch rail, but Harrison and Samuel had cover and position. Harrison took his time with the second shot, aiming carefully despite the adrenaline singing through his veins, and dropped another outlaw from his saddle. The last man, realizing he was outmatched, wheeled his horse and fled. Samuel started to track him with his rifle, but Harrison put a hand on the barrel, pushing it down. Let him go. Let him spread the word about what happens to men who prey on innocent women. Garrett was still alive, bleeding into the dirt and cursing a blue streak. Harrison approached cautiously, his rifle trained on the fallen man. "You have got two choices," he said coldly. "You ride out of here and never come back, or I finish what I started. Your choice, but choose fast because my patience is thin." "You will regret this," Garrett spat, pressing a hand to his wounded shoulder. "I have friends, Quinn. They will hear about this." "Then they can come find me in Eldorado Canyon," Harrison said, "and they can get the same treatment. Now get on your horse and get out of my sight before I change my mind." It took Garrett 3 tries to mount, and he nearly fell twice, but eventually he got himself into the saddle and rode off, swaying dangerously but staying upright. Harrison watched until he disappeared over the ridge, then finally lowered his rifle. "Think he will cause more trouble?" Samuel asked. "Probably. Men like that always do, but not today, and maybe by the time he heals up, he will have had time to reconsider his life choices." Samuel snorted. "You are an optimist. I will give you that." They let the women out of the cellar once they had dealt with the bodies, dragging them far enough from the house to not be offensive, but leaving them visible as a warning to anyone else who might have similar ideas. Julian emerged blinking into the sunlight, her sisters close behind, and looked at Harrison with an expression he could not quite read. "Is it over?" she asked. "For now," he said honestly. "Garrett got away, but he will not be back anytime soon, and word will spread. Most outlaws are cowards at heart. They only prey on the weak and undefended." She nodded slowly, then surprised him by stepping forward and wrapping her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. Harrison froze for a moment, then carefully brought his arms up to hold her, feeling how she trembled despite her brave front. Over her head, he could see Margaret and Catherine watching, and he tried to project reassurance and strength, the way a good man should. "Thank you," Julian whispered against his shirt. "Thank you for everything." "You are welcome," he said, his voice rough. "Always." That night, as they sat around the table sharing a meal, the conversation turned to the future. "What will you do now?" Maria asked gently, looking at the 3 sisters. "Do you have family you can go to?" Margaret and Catherine both looked at Julian, who set down her fork slowly. "We have an aunt in Philadelphia," she said. "Our mother's sister. But we have not seen her in years, and I do not know if she would take us in. And even if she would," she paused, looking down at her hands. "We have no money for travel. The outlaws took everything, and what they did not take burned with our house. We have nowhere to go. Nothing to our names but the clothes Maria generously gave us." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken sympathy. Harrison felt his heart twist at the lost look on Julian's face, the way her shoulders sagged under the weight of responsibility for her younger sisters. An idea that had been forming in the back of his mind crystallized into certainty. "Come to Eldorado Canyon," he heard himself say. "I have a ranch there, a small one but good land. The house is plenty big enough for all of you, and I could use the help. I am not much of a cook, and the place could use a woman's touch." 3 pairs of eyes turned to him, varying shades of surprise and hope on each face. It was Julian who spoke, her voice careful. "Mr. Quinn, we cannot impose on you like that." "You have already done so much. It is not an imposition," he interrupted. "It is an offer of honest work and a roof over your heads. You would earn your keep, and in return, you would have a safe place to stay while you figure out your next steps. No obligations, no strings attached. Just an opportunity." "He is a good man, that one," Maria said, nodding her approval. "If he says there are no strings, he means it." Though, she paused, giving Harrison a look that was entirely too knowing. "I think maybe there might be some strings eventually if a certain young lady is interested." Harrison felt his ears go red and Julian's cheeks flushed pink, but she did not look away. "Are you certain?" she asked quietly. "3 women descending on your ranch. We would turn your life upside down." "My life could use some upside down," Harrison said truthfully. "I have been alone too long. And honestly, I think you all deserve a chance to find your footing again without having to worry about where your next meal is coming from or where you will sleep at night. If that is charity, then so be it. But I prefer to think of it as neighbors helping neighbors." Catherine, who had been quiet through most of the meal, suddenly spoke up. "I can sew," she said shyly. "And Margaret is wonderful with animals. And Julian can do anything she sets her mind to. We would work hard, Mr. Quinn. We would earn our place." "I do not doubt it for a moment," Harrison said, smiling at the youngest sister. "So is that a yes?" Julian looked at her sisters, some silent communication passing between them, then turned back to Harrison. "Yes," she said, and the smile that broke across her face was like the sun coming out after a storm. "Yes, we would be honored to accept your generous offer." They left for El Dorado Canyon 3 days later, the 3 sisters riding a gentle mare that Samuel insisted they take, claiming he had been meaning to trade her anyway. Harrison rode Copper alongside them, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies that Maria had assembled. The journey would take the better part of a day, and Harrison found himself oddly content despite the uncertain future they were riding toward. Julian rode beside him for most of the trip, their conversation easy and wide-ranging. She asked him about his ranch, about the town, about his life before he had become a rancher. He told her about his time in the cavalry, about the years spent drifting after his discharge, trying to find a place to belong, about how he had finally scraped together enough money to buy the land in El Dorado Canyon and build a small house, determined to put down roots and make something of himself. "You ever get lonely?" she asked at one point, her voice quiet so her sisters would not overhear. "All the time," he admitted. "A house is just a building without people to make it a home. I tell myself it is enough, that the work and the land are sufficient, but the truth is, I have been lonely since the day I bought the place. I just did not know how to fix it." "Maybe this is how," Julian said softly. "Maybe that is why you were in El Dorado Canyon that morning, why you saw us being taken. Maybe it was all meant to be. You believe in fate. I believe in second chances," she said, meeting his eyes. "And I think maybe we are all getting one." El Dorado Canyon appeared on the horizon as the sun was beginning its descent. The town nestled in a valley with red rock cliffs rising on either side. It was a small place, maybe 300 souls on a good day, but it was prosperous in the way of mining towns that had struck silver. The main street boasted a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of other businesses. Harrison's ranch was about 2 miles outside of town, 160 acres of decent grazing land with a creek running through it. The house he had built was simple but solid, a 3-room structure with a covered porch and a stone fireplace. There was a barn for the horses and a chicken coop that was currently empty, much to his embarrassment. He had been meaning to buy chickens for months but kept putting it off. Now, seeing the place through the eyes of the 3 sisters, he was acutely aware of all its shortcomings, but Julian dismounted and walked up to the porch with a smile on her face. "It is perfect," she said, and sounded like she meant it. "Oh, Harrison, it is absolutely perfect." Margaret and Catherine were equally enthusiastic, exclaiming over the sturdy construction and the beautiful view of the cliffs. Harrison showed them around, awkwardly explaining that they would have to share the bedroom while he took the small back room, and that the front room served as both kitchen and living area. They assured him it was more than adequate, better than adequate really, and set about exploring with the excitement of children in a new place. That first night was strange and wonderful in equal measure. Julian took over the cooking with an efficiency that spoke of years of practice, producing a meal from his meager supplies that was better than anything Harrison had eaten in months. They ate together at the small table, and afterward, Catherine played a few songs on a battered guitar that Harrison had not touched in years, her voice sweet and clear in the quiet evening air. When the sisters finally retired to the bedroom, Harrison stepped out onto the porch for a final check of the property. He was surprised when Julian joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cool night air. "Could not sleep?" he asked. "Did not want to yet," she said, leaning against the porch railing. "I wanted to thank you again properly without my sisters listening. What you have done for us, offering us a home when you barely know us, it is more than kindness. It is a miracle." "You do not need to thank me every time you see me," Harrison said, though he was smiling. "I offered because I wanted to, because it felt right. Still, I want you to know that we will not take advantage. We will work hard and prove ourselves worthy of your trust." "Julian," he said gently, turning to face her, "you do not have to prove anything. You survived something terrible and you kept your sisters safe and sane through it all. That takes a kind of strength most people never have to find. You are already worthy just by being who you are." She looked up at him, her blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "How are you so good?" she whispered. "How does a man like you even exist?" "I am just a man," he said. "Flesh and blood and faults like anyone else, but I try to do right when I can, and that has to count for something." She reached up and touched his face, her hand cool against his cheek. "It counts for everything," she said, and then, before he could think of a response, she stretched up on her toes and kissed him. It was soft and sweet and over far too quickly, leaving Harrison standing frozen on the porch as she pulled back with a shy smile. "Good night, Harrison Quinn," she said. "Thank you for being our miracle." Then she was gone, slipping back inside the house and leaving Harrison alone with his thundering heart and the taste of her on his lips. He stood there for a long time, looking up at the stars and trying to make sense of the emotions churning inside him. He had known her less than a week, had spoken to her perhaps a dozen hours total. It was too soon to feel what he was feeling, too fast, too everything. But his heart did not care about timing or propriety. His heart only knew that Julian Jennings had walked into his life and turned it upside down in the best possible way. And he was falling for her with a speed and intensity that should have terrified him, but instead felt like coming home. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to life on the ranch. The sisters threw themselves into making the place a proper home with an enthusiasm that was both touching and slightly overwhelming. Catherine took over the garden, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the rocky soil with a skill that seemed almost magical. Margaret proved to have a gift with animals, gentling the horses and even convincing a stray dog to take up residence in the barn. And Julian managed everything and everyone with quiet competence, turning the house from a bachelor's rough shelter into a real home. Harrison found himself inventing reasons to be near Julian, helping with tasks that did not really require two people, lingering over breakfast long after he should have been out checking on the stock. She seemed equally inclined to find excuses to be near him, and their conversations grew longer and more personal as the days passed. He learned that she loved to read but had lost all her books in the fire, so he bought her a novel from the general store in town and was rewarded with a smile that lit up her entire face. She learned that he had a sweet tooth and began making desserts that appeared mysteriously after dinner. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing dreams and fears and stories from their pasts. Margaret and Catherine watched this developing romance with barely concealed amusement, exchanging knowing looks and giggles whenever Harrison and Julian were particularly obvious about their feelings. But they were kind about their teasing, and Harrison got the sense that they approved of him, which mattered more than he would have expected. About a month after the sisters had arrived, Harrison rode into town for supplies and ran into Sheriff Dawson outside the general store. The older man looked Harrison up and down with an appraising eye, then shook his head with a chuckle. "Never thought I would see the day Harrison Quinn walked around with that particular look on his face," Dawson said. "That Oldest Jennings girl must be something special." "Her name is Julian," Harrison said, trying not to sound defensive. "And yes, she is special." "You going to marry her?" The question was blunt and unexpected, and Harrison felt his ears go red. "I have not exactly asked her yet. We have only known each other a month." "A month is plenty of time when you know," Dawson said sagely. "My Martha and I knew each other 3 weeks before I proposed. Been married 32 years come September. When it is right, and no amount of waiting is going to make it more right. Just food for thought, son." Harrison carried those words with him back to the ranch, turning them over in his mind like river stones. Was a month enough time? Did he really know Julian well enough to think about marriage? But even as he asked himself these questions, he knew the answer. He would marry her tomorrow if she would have him, would spend the rest of his life making her happy and keeping her safe. The problem was finding the courage to actually ask. He did not get the chance for another week, and when it came, it was not at all how he had imagined. Julian had ridden into town with Margaret to pick up some fabric for new dresses, leaving Harrison and Catherine to handle the ranch chores. Harrison was in the barn, mending tack when Catherine came to find him. "Can I ask you something personal?" The youngest sister said, perching on a hay bale. "You can ask. I might not answer, but you can ask. Are you in love with my sister?" Harrison's hand stilled on the leather strap he had been working. "That is quite a question, Miss Catherine. Please just call me Catherine." "And I think I deserve to know. Julian is all Margaret and I have left in this world. If you are going to break her heart, I would rather know now." He set down his tools and looked at the young woman seriously. "I am not going to break her heart. At least, I will do everything in my power not to. And yes, since you asked, I am in love with your sister. Deeply, completely, probably foolishly in love with her." Catherine's stern expression melted into a brilliant smile. "Good. Because she is in love with you too, in case you had not noticed. And Margaret and I think you should marry her." "You do you?" "We do. You are a good man, Harrison Quinn. You saved us when you did not have to, you gave us a home when we had nothing, and you treat my sister like she hung the moon. That is the kind of man she deserves. So I am giving you permission, officially, to ask her to marry you." Harrison could not help but laugh at her serious tone. Permission from her sisters? What about permission from the lady herself? "I think you will find she is inclined to say yes, but you will never know unless you ask." She was right, of course. That evening, after dinner, when Margaret and Catherine had conveniently found reasons to be elsewhere, Harrison asked Julian to walk with him. They strolled down to the creek in the fading light, the sound of water over rocks a peaceful counterpoint to Harrison's racing heart. "There is something I need to ask you," he said when they reached a spot where the creek widened into a small pool. And I am probably going about this all wrong, but I figure honest is better than pretty." Julian turned to face him, her blue eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight. "You could never go about anything wrong," she said softly. "Not in my eyes." "I am in love with you," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I have been since that first night at the Fletcher place, maybe even since I first saw your face in that wagon. I know it is too soon, and I know you probably think I am crazy, but I cannot help it. You are everything I never knew I was looking for, and the thought of you leaving, of trying to live without you, is unbearable. So I am asking, even though I have no right to ask, if you would consider staying here permanently, as my wife, if you will have me." Julian was silent for a long moment, and Harrison's heart sank. He had pushed too hard, too fast, had scared her off with the intensity of his feelings. But then she smiled, that radiant smile that made his breath catch, and reached up to cup his face in her hands. "You beautiful fool," she whispered. "Of course I will marry you. I love you too, Harrison. I think I fell in love with you the moment you appeared out of the darkness and told me to trust you. You are my miracle, my second chance, my everything. Yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, properly this time, pulling her close and pouring every ounce of his love and devotion into the embrace. She melted against him, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for a long, perfect moment, the world consisted of nothing but the two of them and the promise of a future together. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Julian laughed. "Your timing is terrible, you know. I am wearing my work dress and I have dirt under my nails." "You are beautiful," Harrison said firmly. "And I do not care what you are wearing or whether there is dirt involved. I just care that you said yes." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and were greeted by Margaret and Catherine, who were not even pretending that they had not been watching from the window. Both younger sisters descended on them with squeals of delight, hugging first Julian and then Harrison, talking over each other in their excitement. "We need to plan a wedding," Margaret said. "Oh, this is wonderful. Catherine, we need to make lists." "Can we have music?" Catherine asked. "I want to play at my sister's wedding." "We can have whatever you want," Harrison said, grinning at their enthusiasm. "As long as the end result is me married to your sister, I am happy." They decided on a small ceremony in 6 weeks, enough time to make preparations, but not so long that the waiting would be torture. Harrison rode into town the next day to speak with Reverend Matthews, a kindly man who ran the small church on the edge of town. The Reverend was delighted to perform the ceremony and offered the use of the church for the occasion. The weeks leading up to the wedding flew by in a blur of activity. Julian and her sisters spent their days sewing a wedding dress, a beautiful creation in cream-colored silk that Harrison was not allowed to see. He spent his time making improvements to the house, adding a proper bedroom for Margaret and Catherine so that he and Julian could have privacy, and building furniture for the new space. The community of Eldorado Canyon rallied around them with a warmth that surprised Harrison. He had always been something of a loner, keeping to himself and his ranch, but now neighbors he barely knew stopped by with gifts and offers of help. The general store owner, Mr. Peterson, donated supplies for the wedding feast. Mrs. Chen from the boarding house offered to make the wedding cake. Even Sheriff Dawson showed up with a set of china that had belonged to his mother, insisting that every new bride needed proper dishes. "You did good, taking in those girls," Dawson said gruffly when Harrison tried to thank him. "And you did even better falling for the oldest one. She is a fine woman, Quinn. You treat her right." "I intend to," Harrison said seriously, "for the rest of my life." The night before the wedding, Harrison found himself unable to sleep. He sat on the porch in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the desert night and thinking about how much his life had changed in just 2 months. He had gone from a lonely bachelor rancher to a man with a family, a man with a future that looked brighter than anything he had dared to dream. Getting cold feet, Julian's voice came from the doorway, and Harrison turned to see her silhouetted against the lamplight from inside. You should not be out here. It is bad luck to see each other before the wedding. That is only on the day of the wedding, she said, coming to sit beside him. And I could not sleep. I kept thinking about tomorrow, about how everything is about to change. Change for the better, Harrison said, taking her hand. I know. But still, it is a little frightening, is it not? Taking this leap together. Terrifying, he admitted, but I would rather be terrified with you than comfortable alone. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. She leaned her head on his shoulder and they sat in comfortable silence for a while. Harrison, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you ever regret it? Rescuing us, I mean. Your life was simpler before we came along and turned it upside down. He turned to look at her, tilting her chin up so their eyes met. I have never regretted it for a single moment. You did turn my life upside down, that much is true. But you also filled it with joy and purpose and love. Before you, I was just going through the motions, existing but not really living. Now I wake up excited for each day, grateful for every moment. That is not something to regret. That is something to celebrate. You always know exactly what to say, she murmured, her eyes bright with tears. Not always. But when it comes to you, the words come easy because they are true. They sat together until the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, then reluctantly parted to prepare for the day ahead. Harrison spent the morning in a state of nervous energy, bathing and shaving carefully, donning the new suit that Margaret and Catherine had insisted he buy for the occasion. Samuel Fletcher arrived to stand up with him, having made the journey from his trading post specifically for the wedding. You look like a man about to face a firing squad, Samuel observed with amusement as they stood in the church waiting for the ceremony to begin. I am not nervous, Harrison lied. Of course not. That is why your hands are shaking, and you have checked your pocket watch 17 times in the last 5 minutes. Before Harrison could formulate a response, the church doors opened and Catherine appeared, followed by Margaret. Both sisters wore new dresses in pale green and looked lovely, but Harrison barely registered their presence because Julian had appeared behind them, and the sight of her stole every thought from his head. The cream-colored dress fit her perfectly, simple in design but elegant, with long sleeves and a high collar that somehow made her look both proper and breathtaking. Her dark hair was swept up in an intricate style that must have taken hours, with small white flowers woven through it. But it was her face that held Harrison transfixed, the radiant joy in her eyes as she walked down the aisle toward him. When she reached his side, he took her hands in his, barely hearing Reverend Matthews's opening words. He was too busy memorizing this moment, the feel of her hands in his, the way she was looking at him like he was the only person in the world. The ceremony was short and sweet, the traditional words taking on new meaning as Harrison pledged his life and love to Julian and she to him. When the Reverend finally pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed her with a tenderness that promised a lifetime of devotion. The celebration that followed was modest but heartfelt. The church social hall had been transformed with wildflowers and ribbons, and tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by half the town. Catherine played her guitar while Margaret sang, and later the fiddler from the saloon arrived to provide music for dancing. Harrison was not much of a dancer, but he held Julian in his arms and swayed to the music, feeling happier than he could ever remember being. She fit against him perfectly, her head resting on his shoulder, and he could feel the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "Happy," he murmured into her hair. "Unbelievably so," she replied. "I keep thinking I am going to wake up and discover this was all a dream. If it is a dream, then we are both dreaming it, and I have no intention of waking up." As the evening wore on and the guests began to depart, Harrison felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness about the night ahead. They had been circumspect in their affections up to this point, mindful of propriety and the presence of Julian's sisters. But tonight, she was his wife in truth as well as name, and the prospect both thrilled and intimidated him. Margaret and Catherine had arranged to spend the night in town with Mrs. Chen at the boarding house, giving the newlyweds privacy. As Harrison helped Julian into the wagon for the ride home, she squeezed his hand and smiled up at him with a mixture of love and nervousness that mirrored his own feelings. The ranch looked different in the moonlight, softer somehow, more welcoming. Harrison helped Julian down from the wagon and swept her up into his arms to carry her over the threshold, making her laugh with surprise and delight. Inside, the house was quiet and peaceful, lit only by the lamp they had left burning in the window. "Are you tired?" Harrison asked, setting her gently on her feet. "Not particularly," Julian said, her cheeks flushed. "Are you?" "No." He cupped her face in his hands, brushing his thumbs over her cheekbones. "I love you, Mrs. Quinn. I will love you until the day I die and probably beyond that." "I love you too," she whispered. "More than I ever thought possible. Show me, Harrison. Show me what it means to be truly loved." He kissed her then, deep and slow, pouring all his love and desire into the embrace. She responded with equal passion, her fingers threading through his hair, pulling him closer. The world narrowed to just the two of them, two souls joining together in a bond that would last a lifetime. Much later, as they lay tangled together in the darkness of their bedroom, Julian traced patterns on Harrison's chest with her fingertips. "I was so afraid," she said quietly. "When the outlaws took us, I was terrified not just of what they might do to me, but of what would happen to Margaret and Catherine. I felt responsible for protecting them, but I was powerless. And then you appeared, and suddenly I was not alone anymore. Suddenly there was someone strong enough and brave enough to fight for us." "You were never powerless," Harrison said, catching her hand and bringing it to his lips. "You kept your sisters sane and hopeful through a nightmare. That takes incredible strength. But I could not have saved us." "Not alone. You did not have to be alone. That is what I am trying to tell you, Julian. You never have to be alone again. Whatever comes, we face it together. That is what marriage means. That is what love means." She lifted her head to kiss him softly. "Together," she agreed. I like the sound of that. The months that followed were among the happiest of Harrison's life. He and Julian settled into married life with an ease that felt natural, as if they had been together for years rather than months. They worked side by side during the day, building up the ranch and making plans for the future, and fell into each other's arms at night with a passion that never seemed to fade. Margaret and Catherine continued to thrive as well. Margaret discovered a talent for training horses and began working with some of the local ranchers, earning money and a reputation for her skill. Catherine's garden flourished beyond anyone's expectations, and she began selling produce in town, her sweet nature and fair prices making her a favorite among the townspeople. As autumn gave way to winter, Julian began to show signs of pregnancy. Harrison noticed before she said anything, the way she would press a hand to her stomach with a secret smile, the way she tired more easily in the evenings. When she finally told him, sitting by the fire one cold December night, he felt his heart expand to accommodate this new joy. "A baby," he said wonderingly, kneeling before her and placing his hand over hers on her stomach. "Our baby. "Are you happy?" she asked, though she must have been able to see the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said. "Overjoyed, terrified, grateful, amazed. All of it at once. You are giving me a family, Julian. A real family. I do not have words for what that means to me." Margaret and Catherine were equally thrilled at the prospect of becoming aunts, immediately beginning to make plans and preparations. Margaret declared she would make a cradle, and Catherine began sewing tiny clothes with painstaking care. The house buzzed with excitement and anticipation through the long winter months. In early spring, as the desert began to bloom with wildflowers, word reached Eldorado Canyon that Jake Garrett had been killed in a shootout with lawmen in California. Sheriff Dawson brought the news to the ranch personally, wanting to make sure Harrison and the sisters knew they were truly safe now. "That is the last of the Garrett gang," Dawson said. "The law caught up with the rest of them over the winter. You can stop looking over your shoulder now, Quinn." Harrison felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had not fully realized he was carrying. "Thank you for letting us know, Sheriff." After Dawson left, Harrison found Julian in the garden, her hand resting on her swollen belly as she watched Catherine work among the plants. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Did you hear?" he asked. "I heard. It is over, really over." She leaned back against him with a sigh. "I should feel more relieved, I suppose, but the truth is, I stopped being afraid a long time ago. When I am with you, I feel safe. When I am home with you and my sisters, I feel protected. Garrett was just a ghost of the past, and now even that ghost is gone. We can truly move forward now," Harrison said. "No more looking back, no more shadows, just us and our future." Their daughter was born on a warm May morning, coming into the world with a lusty cry that announced her arrival to everyone within earshot. Harrison, who had been pacing the porch while Maria Fletcher attended to Julian inside, nearly tripped over his own feet in his haste to get to his wife when Margaret called him in. Julian lay in their bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "Come meet your daughter," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Harrison approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. She was perfect, with a cap of dark hair and eyes that would probably be blue like her mother's. He reached out a tentative finger, and his daughter wrapped her impossibly tiny hand around it with surprising strength. "She is beautiful," he whispered, "just like her mother. We need to name her," Julian said. "I was thinking perhaps Alina after your mother." Harrison felt his throat tighten with emotion. His mother had died when he was young, and he rarely spoke of her, but the fact that Julian remembered and wanted to honor her memory touched him deeply. "Alina Quinn," he said, testing out the name. "It is perfect." The house that had once been too quiet for one lonely bachelor became filled with the sounds of life. A baby's cries and coos, Catherine's laughter, Margaret's animated conversations about the horses, Julian's singing as she worked. Harrison would sometimes stand in the doorway and just listen, marveling at how full his life had become. When Alina was 6 months old, a letter arrived from Philadelphia. It was from the aunt that Julian had mentioned months ago, finally responding to a letter Julian had sent shortly after the wedding. The aunt wrote that she was elderly and in poor health, and while she would love to see her nieces, she was not in a position to take them in. However, she wanted them to know that she loved them and was overjoyed to hear they had found a safe and happy home. Julian read the letter aloud to her sisters, and Margaret and Catherine both agreed that they had no desire to leave Nevada anyway. This was their home now, with Harrison and Julian and little Alina. They were a family, and families stayed together. As Alina grew from a baby into a toddler, the ranch prospered. Harrison expanded the herd and bought more land, building up a reputation for quality cattle. Margaret's horse training business grew to the point where she built her own small barn on the property and took on a partner, a quiet young man named Thomas Hartwell, who was clearly smitten with her. Catherine continued to work her magic in the garden and also began teaching at the small school in town, her gentle nature making her beloved by the children. On their third wedding anniversary, Harrison and Julian stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the cliffs red and gold. Eleanor was asleep inside, and for a moment, it was just the two of them, the way it had been that first night when Julian had kissed him and changed his life forever. "You remember when you told me that you did not know how to fix your loneliness?" Julian asked, leaning against his side. "I remember everything about those first days with you," Harrison said. "I think about it sometimes, about how close we came to never meeting. If you had not been in Eldorado Canyon that day, if you had not followed the Outlaws, if you had not been brave enough to pull us from that camp, our lives would be so different, we would be different, or we would be dead," Harrison said bluntly. "Let's not sugarcoat what would have happened if I had not intervened. True." She shuddered slightly, and he pulled her closer. "But we are here now, alive and happy and building a life together. Sometimes I feel like I need to pinch myself to believe it is real." "It is real," Harrison assured her. "This is our life, the one we chose together. And I intend to spend every day of it making sure you never regret saying yes to me." "I could never regret it," Julian said, turning in his arms to face him. "You saved my life, Harrison Quinn, but more than that, you gave me a reason to want to live it fully. You gave me love and hope and a home. You gave me everything. You gave me more," he countered. "You gave me a purpose, a family, a reason to be better than I was. Before you, I was just existing. Now I am truly alive." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. Their love story had begun with violence and fear, but it had transformed into something precious and enduring, a testament to the power of second chances and the resilience of the human heart. Years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the changing seasons. Eleanor grew into a bright, curious child who adored her Aunt Margaret and Aunt Catherine and followed her father around the ranch whenever he would let her. Two more children followed, a son named Henry and another daughter named Grace, filling the house with noise and laughter. Margaret eventually married Thomas Hartwell in a quiet ceremony at the ranch, and they built a house on the far side of the property where they raised horses and eventually 4 children of their own. Catherine married a teacher from Carson City who came to visit the school in Eldorado Canyon and fell in love with the shy, gentle young woman who tended the most beautiful garden he had ever seen. They settled in town, close enough for frequent visits but far enough for independence. Through it all, Harrison and Julian remained the steady center of their growing family. Their love deepened with time, weathered by the challenges of life but never diminished. They faced drought years and prosperous years, sickness and health, joy and sorrow, always together, always partners. On their 20th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party at the ranch. The house and yard were filled with people. Margaret and Thomas and their brood, Catherine and her husband with their 3 children, neighbors and friends from town, even Sheriff Dawson, who was now fully retired but still liked to check in on Harrison. As Harrison looked around at the gathered crowd, at the life he and Julian had built together, he felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. His gaze found Julian across the yard, surrounded by their grandchildren, her dark hair now streaked with silver but her blue eyes as bright as ever. She looked up and met his gaze, and the smile she gave him was the same one that had stolen his heart 20 years ago. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Harrison and Julian walked out to their favorite spot by the creek. The moon was full, casting silver light across the water, and the air was cool and sweet with the scent of Catherine's flowers. 20 years, Julian said wonderingly. How did that happen so fast? Good lives pass quickly, Harrison said. That is what my mother used to say. When you are happy, time flies. We have been happy, have we not? Despite everything, despite how it all started, we have built something good here. We have built something extraordinary, Harrison corrected. You and me and your sisters, we took pain and fear and turned it into love and family. That is not just good, Julian. That is miraculous. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they stood in comfortable silence, listening to the creek and the night sounds of the desert. Do you ever think about that morning in Eldorado Canyon? She asked. About how one choice, one moment of courage, changed everything. All the time, Harrison admitted. I think about what might have happened if I had walked away, if I had listened to Sheriff Dawson and waited for a posse. And then I look at our life, at our children and grandchildren, at everything we have created together, and I am grateful beyond words that I did not walk away, that I followed my heart instead of my head. Your heart has always been good, Julian said softly. That is what I loved first about you, I think. Not your courage or your strength, though those are certainly admirable, but your heart, your kindness, your instinct to protect and help even when it put you at risk. That is the man I fell in love with. And you are the woman who taught me that being alone and being lonely are two different things, Harrison said. Before you, I thought I was content with solitude, but you showed me what I was missing, what life could be when shared with someone who understands you completely. They talked long into the night, reminiscing about their years together, about the challenges they had faced and the triumphs they had celebrated. As the moon began to set, and the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon, they walked back to the house hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future held as long as they faced it together. More years passed in a golden haze of contentment. Alina married a rancher from a neighboring property and blessed Harrison and Julian with 5 grandchildren. Henry followed in his father's footsteps, taking over more and more of the ranch operations as Harrison grew older and finally convinced him to slow down. Grace became a teacher like her Aunt Catherine, beloved by generations of students in Eldorado Canyon. On a warm spring day when Harrison was 65 years old, he sat on the porch watching his great-grandchildren play in the yard while Julian dozed in the chair beside him. Her hair was fully silver now, and time had etched lines around her eyes and mouth, but to Harrison, she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her face in that wagon. As if sensing his gaze, Julian opened her eyes and smiled at him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything," he said simply. "Our life together, how blessed I have been, how every good thing I have came from one decision to do the right thing." "You saved more than 3 women that day," Julian said. "You saved yourself too, Harrison. You were so lonely, so lost, even if you did not want to admit it. We saved each other." "I suppose we did," he agreed, "though I still say I got the better end of the bargain." She laughed, the sound as warm and familiar as home. "We are not keeping score. Love is not about who gives more or who receives more. It is about the giving and receiving itself, the back and forth, the balance." "When did you get so wise?" he teased. "I learned from my husband," she said, reaching over to take his hand. "He taught me that love is action, not just words. That's showing up every day, working together, supporting each other through good times and bad. That is what builds a lasting marriage. I am just repeating what you have demonstrated for over 40 years." They sat in comfortable silence as the afternoon wore on, their great-grandchildren's laughter filling the air, the ranch bustling with the activity of multiple generations working and living together. It was everything Harrison had never dared to dream, and yet here it was, real and solid and his. As the sun began to set, painting the cliffs in shades of red and gold, Harrison thought about the young man he had been, riding into Eldorado Canyon with nothing but a horse and a dream. He thought about the moment he had made the choice to follow those outlaws, to risk his life for 3 women he did not know. It had seemed like a simple act of decency at the time, the only choice a good man could make. But that choice had led to everything. To Julian and their children, to Margaret and Catherine and their families, to this sprawling, loving, chaotic family that had grown from one act of courage. It had led to a life rich with meaning and purpose, filled with love and laughter and the deep satisfaction of knowing he had made a difference. "Thank you," he said quietly to Julian. "For what?" "For saying yes," he said. "For trusting me, for loving me, for building this life with me. For being my partner and my best friend, for everything." Julian squeezed his hand, her blue eyes shining with tears. "Thank you for being the kind of man worth saying yes to," she replied. "Thank you for riding into our lives and refusing to leave. Thank you for 43 years of love and support and partnership. Thank you for being exactly who you are." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Harrison pulled Julian close, and they sat together watching their family, their legacy, the proof that one moment of courage and one decision to love could change the world. Their story had started in darkness and fear, but it had blossomed into light and joy, a testament to the enduring power of love to transform and heal and create something beautiful from even the most painful beginnings. The cowboy who had pulled 3 sisters from an outlaw camp and the eldest sister who had said they had nowhere to go had found their home together, and in doing so, had created a home for generations to come. It was a love story for the ages, born in the wild west of Nevada, nurtured through decades of partnership, and destined to be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Not the land they had acquired or the cattle they had raised, but the love they had shared and the family they had created together. A love that had started with 3 words, "We have nowhere to go," and had transformed into a resounding chorus of "We are home." Harrison Quinn and Julian Jennings Quinn had found their happily ever after, not in spite of the hardships they had endured, but because of them. They had taken the worst moment of their lives and turned it into the foundation of something enduring and beautiful. They had built a family, a home, and a love that would outlast them both, carried forward in the hearts and memories of everyone they had touched. As they sat together under the Nevada stars, surrounded by the sounds of family and the warmth of a life well lived, both Harrison and Julian knew with absolute certainty that they had been blessed beyond measure. The cowboy had saved the sisters, but in truth, they had saved each other, and in doing so had created a love story that would echo through time, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope and love can light the way home.